Hey guys, welcome back. It's Coach Bob here at CrossFit Glen Burnie, and today in this video, we're going to feature the overhead squat. I'm going to share with you a little bit of the struggles that I had learning the overhead squat and pass along some of the tips and
small double shot Americano to start today. Top tip.
That made a big difference for me, and hopefully these things can help you as well. I'd also like to kind of touch a little bit on why do we even do the overhead squat. So first, let's take a look at the CrossFit video and see what we can learn with the overhead squat. So here we have the overhead squat, and I can play through this video a little bit for us, and we can kind of see what this might look like. All right, this was not what Coach Bob looked like on day one doing overhead squats. So this guy's doing a very good job of keeping his feet flat on the ground. His arms are stable overhead. Everything's moving nice and smooth like butter. His hips are smooth. The arms are in a great position. The bar's locked out overhead. He's focused on some distant point far away, probably thinking about some good paleo meal he's going to eat later. But this was not what Coach Bob looked like. Let me freeze that one right there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why we're doing the overhead squat. Well, look, we got a really good, we're maintaining that natural lumbar spine. His knees are tracking out over his feet. His hips are, full depth kind of a squat. The bar is locked out overhead, a great overhead position. So the reason I think, and there may be different answers to this question, but the reason why I think we're doing the overhead squat is just because it is challenging. If I don't have good shoulder mobility, or if I don't have good hip mobility, or if I am compensating in my spine or my midline some way, then that's going to show up in the overhead squat. And we always practice mechanics and then consistency before we add load or intensity. So my first overhead squat that I was doing was just with a PVC, and then a PVC with sand. And then we have a 15-pound bar, and then gradually building up over time. But I didn't look like this. This was very, very challenging position. So I want to share with you a CrossFit training video with Denise Thomas, and she's going over the overhead squat with some folks, and she's talking about the shoulder position. So the reason I want to share this with you is that this is what we'll oftentimes we'll hear from coaches about the overhead position and how we want the shoulders to be and where we want the elbows to be. But sometimes that's not the whole thing. The underlying issue may be somewhere else, upstream or downstream of the shoulders. And this position might be very challenging, especially for Coach Bob in the early days, to try to be able to do this because my shoulders were so tight from spending too many years in front of a computer, laptop or desktop computer, just doing too much computer software development. So let's take a look at what Denise has to say.
Elbows down. So what I want you to do is take your right hand and pop it up. Okay, this is a good position. Your elbow is down and your armpits are flashing out. Now, if you go like this and turn your hand down, your elbow's now pointing backwards. Does that make sense? So this is what that looks like at the bottom of a squat. So I'm going to say screw the light bulb or rotate and elevate. To highlight that, I want you guys to get on the pipe and open your hands just like this, find the middle of the head and press up. Go ahead. Nice, Courtney. Now, Courtney, I'm pulling down, so keep punching up. Good. Excellent. Way better, Janelle. Push up, hands flat for me. Yeah, take those thumbs behind. Good. Keep pressing up a little bit more. Press up. Now we're going to squat. When you squat, that bar has to travel back as the butt goes back. And down. Keep pressing up. Eyes forward, Liz. Good girl. Punch up a little higher. Yes. Keep your hips down. Keep your hips down. Pull that bar back for me, Adrian.
So Denise Thomas is great. I had a chance to, during my level 2 seminar, she was one of the level 2 seminar staff. And she coached us through the push jerk, and it was just amazing. She was, coaching like 16 or 20 of us, and she knew all of our names, and she was able to correct like 50 of us, 50 different things. And it just felt very engaging. So she does a great job with that. Now, what she's trying to help us with here is like the overhead position. And it is a common struggle that we have. But the reason why we may struggle with that overhead position, maybe that, we know what you're saying, we're trying to do it, but it's just very challenging to do it, especially if we're holding a barbell overhead. And the problem may be that we just have, I'll just say tight shoulders and tight hips. So what I want to share next is a video from Cole Seger, a CrossFit Games athlete. He was a football player in college, I believe, and he struggled with overhead mobility, and he shares a couple of the things that he was doing to make that better. And these are some of the things that made a big difference for me too. And so I just want to share that with you because it's a little bit at a time and an emphasis on reclaiming the range of motion in our shoulders and in our hips. And that does not require a heavy load or a heavy barbell. We want to focus on the mechanics of the movement and then get consistently good at that before we add load. And so Coach Bob in the first year of CrossFit would spend many workouts working on light weights, PVC, light barbells, not doing the prescribed weights by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it was a whole year before I was able to do a 95-pound barbell overhead squat. And that day I did one and I was so happy, but that was it. It was like, that was one overhead squat. But it took a lot of that practice. So I want to share Cole Seger's video on the overhead squat that he and some of the things he was doing to make his overhead squat better.
I used to have terrible overhead mobility. I played 4 years of college football. My shoulders were beat up, battered. I had a very hard time getting in an overhead squat or just having good, proper overhead mobility.
All right, so let's take a look here, because I think this is a key point in anybody's development, right? So we're doing a little bit at a time over a long time. Look at Cole Seger on the left side of the screen. This is where he was kind of starting, and he probably even was at the time was feeling decent about that. But this was kind of what Coach Bob was like whenever he was trying to do an overhead squat as well. That ideal position of the shoulders was look where his armpits are. They're down. Denise Thomas would not be happy with this, right? The elbows are kind of pointing back a little bit. His midline is kind of, there's not that natural lumbar. And what's happening here? I mean, Cole is just struggling to get that overhead position. The overhead position in the shoulders, his shoulders are probably tight, his hips are probably tight. And so he has to do something to kind of solve that problem. So on the right-hand side, we kind of see, the result of all that hard work. And his overhead position and his hips look more like that ideal position we were seeing in the CrossFit video. So I want to let Cole talk a little bit about what he was doing to make that better. Let's go, Cole.
At all. And that's become one of the most common questions I get from people is, how did I get such good overhead mobility? It's because I made the effort every single day to improve my overhead mobility, and that is the reason why I did. So I wanted to give you a couple ways that I have improved my overhead mobilities and some of the things that I've done. One of the main things that I did was sit in the bottom of an overhead squat. I had a friend ask me one time, what's the one thing that you do to improve your overhead mobility? And I said, man, I just sit in an overhead squat. Like I come into the gym and I get down in an overhead squat. I just sit in there for 2 minutes. And he's like, dude, I can't sit in an overhead squat. I can't even overhead squat yet. And so like I took him through. I was like, well, I didn't start there either. I couldn't get into an overhead squat properly. I started by just standing with the barbell over my head for 2 minutes every single day, and then slowly getting lower and lower into a squat and holding those positions. And over time, I've even started to bring my grip in narrower. And now I sit in that position with a more narrow grip for 2 minutes. And I still do it today.
So this is key. I mean, this is the thing that I want to pass along, is that it's not like, hey, one day it's a 45-pound bar, then he's 65, then he's up to a 75-pound barbell, and now he's 95. It's a different progression when it comes to working on range of motion. he's still doing an empty barbell and he's a CrossFit Games athlete, right? So what he's doing is he's doing a little bit at a time. Cole started out and, he couldn't spend 2 minutes in the bottom of a squat. So what would he do? He would break it down. Maybe he would just stand with the bar or stand in a partial squat with the bar overhead. And gradually over time, over weeks and months, he would get gradually better. Now, Cole's going to provide some more tips as well, and definitely things that helped Coach Bob as he was working on his overhead mobility. So let me let Cole Sager continue.
So we'll come into the gym, and one of the first things I do is just kind of get nice and comfortable, and I'll sit in an overhead position. And then one of the other things that I loved doing when I first started doing CrossFit, and I still take this in, is I love getting into a position that kind of pulls me overhead and has traction. Something that stretches out my lats, stretches out my shoulders, but also kind of adds traction onto it. So one of the things that I did I would hook up a band on like a pull-up bar, and I would kind of step back, and same arm, same leg, I would lunge back and I would stretch my whole side. That really helped open up the shoulder capsule and give me the motion and mobility to be able to get the internal and external rotation needed to overhead squat. And I would go and I would kind of turn my arm and move it around, and I would find different positions that felt tight, and I'd just kind of play with it. And I'd spend 5 minutes in that position on both, maybe a couple minutes on each side, sit in my overhead position, and then I'm good to go. And I think
so that position that Cole has on that for the banded distraction is really helpful, and there's a lot of goodness in there. And I just want to pass along a few tips on that one, because you can see the video, but it's important that you let the band do the work when you're doing this overhead distraction. You're not really actively pulling on it and building muscle strength. You get more benefit by relaxing those big muscle groups like the lats and letting them kind of lengthen and relax, while you can also work on just rotating the shoulder and creating that roll, slide, and glide inside of the shoulder capsule that gives you a lot of movement options. And so if you think about like just that shoulder just taking a beating over the years of, in Cole's case, he was playing football and sports, and in Coach Bob's case, he had his hands on the keyboard and that kind of a thing. If we can spend some time with band distraction and create space in that shoulder, that gives us more movement options. And also you get some good blood flow into the shoulder and the shoulder capsule as well, and start activating the muscles that are actually responsible for rotating them and placing them into a good stable position, like Denise Thomas was trying to get us to. So these two tips that we, Cole's providing, both of, with a light load, just reclaiming that range of motion and spending time getting into the bottom of a squat, and a band. It's not complicated. It's these simple things practiced consistently over time that make a big difference. So I just wanted to pass along those tips for us today, guys. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this video today and learning a little bit about Coach Bob's struggles with the overhead squat. And hopefully some of these tips can help you to reclaim a little bit of that range of motion and improve your overhead squat, and thereby improve your life. Thank you guys so much for checking in tonight. Take care and have a good night. Peace.